of grace is Jesus my Redeemer. There is no more for heaven now to give. He is my joy, my righteousness and freedom, my steadfast love, my deep and boundless peace. To this I hold, my hope is only Jesus, for my life is wholly bound to His. Oh, how strange and divine, I can sing, all is mine, yet not I, but through Christ in me. The night is dark, but I am not forsaken, for by my side the Savior He will stay. I labor on in weakness and rejoicing, for in my need His power is displayed. To this I hold, my shepherd will defend me. Through the deepest valley He will lead. All the night has been won, and I shall overcome, yet not I, but through Christ in me. With every breath I long to follow Jesus, for He has said that He will bring me home. And day by day I know He will renew me, until I stand with joy before the throne. To this I hold, my hope is only Jesus. All the glory evermore to Him. When the race is complete, still my lips shall repeat, yet not I, but through Christ in me. When the race is complete, still my lips shall repeat, yet not I, but through Christ in me. Yet not I, but through Christ in me.
Welcome all. We're here together for our Good Friday worship service, our experience of worship together here at the James River. I'll invite you to be contemplative, to be thoughtful, to dig in, to sit down, to settle somewhere wherever you are, so that you can hear what the Spirit of God is speaking to us today.
When he finished sending up his prayers, he and the ones who walked the road with him walked across the valley of darkness and entered a garden with many olive trees. Judas, the betrayer, knew about this place because Jesus would often go there with his followers. The betrayer came into the garden, and with him came a band of lodge soldiers sent from the scroll keepers, head holy men and Pharisees, representing the elders of the Grand Council. The air was filled with the smell of burning torches as they entered the garden carrying clubs and long knives. Jesus knew all this would happen, yet he turned to the soldiers and asked,
"Who have you come for?"
With one voice they answered back,
"Jesus, from Nazareth."
The betrayer, Judas, was standing there with the lodge soldiers when Jesus answered,
"I am he."
At the sound of his voice, they all moved back and fell to the ground. He asked them again.
"Who have you come for?"
They answered,
Jesus from Nazareth.
He said,
I told you already. I am the one you are looking for. Let these other men go.
He said this to fulfill his promise. None of the ones you gave to me have been lost. Right then, Peter drew his long knife from its sheath and cut off the right ear of the servant of the chief holy man. The servant's name was Malchus. Jesus turned to Peter and cried out,
Enough of this. Put your long knife back into its sheath. Shall I not drink the cup of suffering my Father has asked of me?
The lodge soldiers, along with their head soldier and the Grand Council representatives, took hold of Jesus, tied him securely with cowhide strips, and took him first to Annas, one of the high holy men. It was the father of the wife of Caiaphas, the chief holy man, who advised the Grand Council by saying,
It will be better if one man dies for all the people.
Peter and one other follower had been watching from a distance. Since this follower was known by the chief holy man, he entered the courtyard of the house, but Peter stood outside the gate. The follower spoke to the gatekeeper, a young woman, who then let Peter in. She said to him,
Are you not one of his followers?
He told her.
No, I am not.
The night was growing cold, so some of the men, along with the soldier guards from the lodge, built a fire in the courtyard to keep warm. Peter stood there with them, trying to stay warm. Back inside, the chief holy man began to question Jesus about his followers and his teachings. Jesus said to him,
I have spoken openly to all, in the gathering houses and the sacred lodge. I said nothing in secret. Why ask me? Ask the ones who heard me. They will know.
One of the head soldiers struck him in the face and said,
Is that how you answer a chief holy man?
Jesus answered him back,
If I have spoken wrongly, tell me what I said wrong. If I spoke what is true, then by what right do you strike me?
Annas decided to send Jesus to Caiaphas, the chief holy man, so they took him, still bound by ropes, to Caiaphas. Outside in the courtyard, Peter was still warming himself by the fire. The others asked him,
You are not one of his followers, are you?
Peter denied.
No, I am not.
One of the servants of the chief holy man, a relative of the man whose ear had been cut off, looked at him and said,
Yes, you are. I saw you in the garden with him.
Peter shook his head in denial, and right then a rooster began to crow. Jesus was taken from the house of Caiaphas to the lodge of the governor of the Romans. The tribal leaders stayed outside, for they did not want to become ceremonially unclean by going inside. It was early in the morning, and many of them had not eaten the ceremonial meal of Passover. Pilate came outside to meet them. They took Jesus and stood him before Pilate. He took a good long look at him and then turned back to the crowd. He asked them.
What has this man done wrong?
They answered.
If he were not a criminal, would we have brought him to you? Take him away.
Pilate said to them.
Use your own law to decide what to do.
They answered.
Our tribal law will not permit us to put him to death.
That proved Jesus was right when he told them how he would die, by being nailed to a tree pole, the cross. Pilate went back into his lodge and had Jesus brought to him, so he could question him in private. Once inside, he said to him,
Are you the chief of the tribes of Israel?
Jesus asked.
Is this your question, or are you listening to others?
Pilate answered.
I am not from your tribes. It is your own people and their head holy men who have turned you over to me. What have you done?
Jesus answered.
My way of ruling is a good road. It is not in the ways of this world. If it were, my followers would have fought to keep me from being captured.
Pilate said to him.
So then you are a chief.
Jesus answered.
It is you who have said it. I was born for this, and have come into the world for this purpose, to tell about the truth. The ones who belong to the truth will listen to my voice.
Pilate shook his head and said,
What is truth?
Then Pilate went outside to the tribal leaders and said to them,
I find no guilt in this man. By your own tradition, we set free one criminal during your Passover festival. Do you want me to release Jesus, your chief?
The crowd roared back.
No, not him. Release Barabbas.
Barabbas was a troublemaker who had caused an uprising. Pilate turned Jesus over to his soldiers to have him beaten. The soldiers twisted together a headdress from a thorn bush, pressed the thorns into his head, and wrapped a purple chief blanket around him. They bowed down before him, making a big show of it, and kept mocking him, saying, Honor, honor, to the great chief of the tribes of Israel. They took turns hitting him on the face, until he was bruised and bloodied. Pilate stood before the crowd again and said,
I bring to you the one in whom I have found no guilt.
Jesus was brought forward, blood flowing down his bruised face. He was wearing the headdress of thorns and the purple chief blanket that was wrapped around him. Pilate said to him,
Behold the man. Take a good long look at him.
The crowd stared at him in stunned silence. But then the head holy men and the lodge guards began to shout.
Death! Death on the cross!
Pilate said to them,
Then take him and kill him yourselves. I find no guilt in him.
They answered back,
Our law tells us he must die, for he has represented himself as the Son of the Great Spirit.
When Pilate heard this, his fear grew stronger. So he took Jesus back inside his lodge. He questioned him.
Who are you? And where are you from?
Jesus stood there and remained silent. Pilate warned him.
Speak to me. Do you not know I have the power of life and death over you? I can have you killed or set you free. Have you nothing to say?
Jesus answered,
The only power you have is what has been given you from above. The ones who turned me over to you carry the greater guilt.
Pilate tried harder to have Jesus released, but the people would not have it. They stood their ground, saying,
If you release a man who says he is a chief, you are not honoring the ruler of your people, for anyone who claims to be a chief challenges his power.
When Pilate heard this, he took Jesus and went to the stone of deciding, called Golgotha in the tribal language, and sat down. It was now midday on the day of preparation for the Passover festival. He brought Jesus before the people and said,
Here is your chief.
The crowd shouted with one voice.
Take him away! Take him away! Nail him to the cross!
Pilate asked them.
Would you have me nail your chief to the cross?
This time the head holy men answered back.
We have no other chief than Caesar.
Pilate then turned Jesus over to the soldiers to have him put to death on a tree pole, the cross. So they took him away. The cross was an instrument of torture and terror used by the Romans to strike fear into the hearts of any who dared to rise up against their empire. The victims' hands and feet would be pierced with large iron nails, fastening them to the cross. The victims would hang there, sometimes for days, until they were dead. This was one of the most cruel and painful ways to die ever devised by human beings. The soldiers placed a wooden crossbeam on his back and forced him to carry it to the place where he would be executed. Jesus carried the crossbeam to the place of the skull, which is called Golgotha in the tribal language. There they nailed his hands and feet to the cross, along with the two others, and placed his cross between the two of them. Pilate fastened a sign to the top of the cross, where they attached the crossbeam with these words written on it: From Nazareth, chief of the tribes of Israel. This was near Jerusalem, so that many of the tribal members could read it. The sign was written in Aramaic, their tribal language, but also in Latin and Greek, the languages of the Romans. The chief head holy men and the tribal leaders said to Pilate,
Do not write chief of tribes. Instead write, he said he is chief.
But he answered.
What I have written will stand.
The soldiers stripped his clothes from him when they nailed his hands and feet to the cross. They tore one of his garments into 4 pieces, one for each guard. His long outer garment was woven together into one piece, so they said,
Let us not tear this. We can draw straws for it.
This gave full meaning to the sacred teachings that said, They divided my clothes between them and gambled for my garment. This is what the soldiers did as they kept watch over Jesus. Standing near the cross was Mary, the mother of Jesus, who had come to see him along with her sister. 2 other women also came with her, Mary the wife of Clopas and Mary from Magdala. John, the much-loved follower of Jesus, was also there with them. When Jesus looked down and saw them, he said to his mother,
Honored woman, look to your son.
Then he said to his follower,
Look to your mother.
From that time, the follower took Mary into his family and cared for her. Jesus, knowing he had done all the ancient sacred teachings had foretold, said,
I thirst.
There was a vessel of sour and bitter wine standing nearby. One of the soldiers dipped a cloth in it to soak up some wine. He wrapped the cloth around the tip of a hyssop branch and held it up to the mouth of Jesus. He then tasted the bitter wine, turned his head to the sky, and cried out loud.
It is done.
He then lowered his head to his chest, and, with his last breath, gave up his spirit.
On Good Friday, death is our focus. We think a lot about the harm that's been done to Christ, the harm that's been done to Jesus by Rome, the harm that was done to him by the established church, by seeking to kill him, by Jesus' own followers even, and cutting people apart or denying that they even knew who Jesus was, falling asleep because he asked them to pray. We don't always talk about the harm that we do. When we think about the harm that we do, our instinct is to pull back. We defend ourselves. We get upset. We get angry. We lash out. We reject it. We come to the river. So often, we come to play and take pictures, to have picnics and to watch sunsets. All of the water that we drink comes from here. We wash our cars, we wash ourselves, we baptize our babies in it. We know the harm that we've done to it. We know that we've polluted it. We know that we've destroyed the things that live in it, the animals that depend on it, hurting ourselves in the process. If you walk here to Belle Isle, read the historic signs, you can see another way that we have harmed the people who historically lived here. The indigenous people that were connected to the river. We don't often reflect on them, but this was their home long before any of us or our ancestors came here or were forced to come here. They were killed. And the people that live here now, you and I, the people who benefit from living here, who benefit from their deaths, who benefit from the wealth that was created out of their destruction. We're responsible, at least in some way, for that. We don't want to think about it. It's hard to imagine that our life right now is only the way it is because someone else suffered. We want to consider ourselves a special case. That we aren't part of the whole, that we aren't really part of this world. We're not part of the harm that goes on around us. We aren't part of the hurt and the death that has turned things into profit, that we don't benefit from it in some way, but we do. We are. We're part of it. In the same time period, the crucifixion is happening. We celebrate Maundy, Thursday, the Last Supper. We kind of pull some things apart there, but the washing of the feet, Last Supper, and the death of Jesus are all in the same 24-hour period. I think back about that night as we're thinking and talking about death, about how we don't want to be part of that kind of story. And it was true even then for the disciples. They didn't want their feet to be washed. Peter was the one that stood out the most and said, "No, you can't. I won't let you do this." And then got it wrong again and said, "Well, how about my whole body?" And Jesus had to rein him back in. It's similar. It's so similar to us in the church. How often when we think about the idea of even showing our feet, our feet that can represent the ugliness of us. Not very many people are proud of their feet. Even as I'm sitting here taking off my shoes, I'm thinking about how my nails look, how my toes appear, the quality of my skin. Our feet show blisters and cuts and bruises. They're the perfect metaphor for our lives, our spirits, our souls that have been cut and bruised and hurt by the world, and we are reluctant to share that. We're reluctant to bear ourselves in that way, to be naked in this way. We want to say that we're different. We want to say, well, my feet are a special case and you can't see them, or you can't wash them, or you don't want to know what they really look like. And Jesus says, you are part of the whole. You're just like everyone else in this amazing and good and wonderful and beautiful way. Whatever your soul looks like, whatever the condition of it is, however your feet have been cut and bruised and blistered and broken, we all are in the same system. We're all a part of the whole. Peter was both righteous and terrible. So often that is the space that we live in. Clean and unclean, broken and healed. We are part of the whole that creates hurt. We, Christian people, part of a larger Christian multitude in this country that we know creates harm and destruction, who wields the Bible like a knife to cut people and to destroy lives. We have to say, well, we're different, but we're also a part of that. We're broken, and we're healing. We're putting our feet in the water and seeing that there's still mud and muck on us. We are in a special place and the same place. This Good Friday, sitting by the river, thinking and knowing all the things that go on, that happen here, the goodness and the hardship that surrounds this place. We put our feet into the water. We are people of two kinds. We are living and we are dying. The river keeps on moving, keeps on being renewed. Thank God for that. We keep changing, having new ears for how past actions have made hurt and how new actions will seek better to love. We can't run from who we are, but we can give in, accept our part in the whole, wade out into the water, watch death take place, and wait for the rain to come, for the water to be renewed, and for Easter morning to come again.